if the OspA vaccine alone caused people the same identical disease, chronic multi-system protein disease, as Lyme disease itself, then what is the disease? So you have to look at what OspA actually is. And doctors should have some background in organic chemistry. I think they're required to in pre-med. So they would have to know what is the structure of OspA. How can you have a vaccine against something when you don't even know what that vaccine is? Typically, a vaccine against a viral disease will be live attenuated or partially heat-killed viruses. Not completely heat-killed, but most of them are dead. So you're injecting mostly dead viruses into you, then you're going to make antibodies against them before the viruses start replicating and overwhelm you, make you sick. That's the idea behind vaccines. But with the Lyme vaccine, they used a recombinant antigen. They used the DNA plasmid from the OspA/OspB gene and put it into E. coli and then farmed E. coli. Had E. coli be the substrate to produce OspA, and they separated it out. And then they had this recombinant antigen from the small.
Do you have any ibuprofen left?
Yeah, it's right here, babe, on the table. From the small plasmid DNA, spliced into E. coli, and they produce this recombinant antigen OspA, which is a triacyl lipoprotein. Now, people can go online and just look up lipoprotein and find out that that's different from typical bacteria's surface antigens, which are lipopolysaccharide, and that they are only made by certain bacteria, which are, brucellosis and mycoplasma and mycobacteria and like Lyme. And they're what?
No, talk to the damn dog.
Oh. So, OspA is a triacyl lipoprotein. It is tripalmitoyl cysteine. They've done chemical analyses of this molecule, and based on molecular weight and the fact that it takes palmitoyl acid. What's for dinner? And so it's PAM3-cis. It's tripalmitoyl cysteine. There's 3 acyl groups on it, and these are held together by electronegative cysteine core. If you look at the molecule of PAM3-cis, you see a whole bunch of oxygen molecules, a sulfur molecule, which is part of the cysteine, and they're all, so if that many electronegative atoms together in the same area is going to make it proton seeking, or looking for a positive charge. And then at the other end of it is all these acyl groups or lipid groups or fatty acid groups like margarine, which is not soluble in water, and that's what's an endotoxin. That is what causes a toxic shock response. It's not the protein end, it's this other thing. And I guess fungal diseases are bad. Brucellosis is bad, tuberculosis is bad, takes a long time to get rid of it. Obviously fungal diseases have long been known to be very damaging. There was recently a case about people with fungal contamination of some kind of meningitis treatment. Well, I don't know what it was, a steroid or something like that.
It was a steroid. It was a steroid, the New England Compounding Center.
Right, and those people just came out in the news. They're very, very sick, and they're pissed off because you cannot inject people with fungal antigens.
It killed something like 70 people.
Right, one of them was a judge or something like that. Those people are not better now because they got injected with fungi. I mean, one of the reasons they put thimerosal in vaccines is because it inhibits the growth of fungi. Cannot inject people with fungal antigens. And Lyme spirochetes shed fungal antigens, which ruin the immune system. And the OspA vaccine, when injected into the bloodstream, caused the same endotoxic shock, endotoxin tolerance, immune paralysis. What other words are we using to describe this? Response, immunosuppression response. The result of an immunosuppression response, everyone knows, is the reactivation of latent herpes viruses. This happens all the time. A primary disabling characteristic of sepsis. If you're in a hospital in the ICU and you've had surgery and there was an infection and now you're in septic shock, a well-known outcome of that is the reactivation of latent herpes viruses like EBV and cytomegalovirus and so on. If Lyme and syphilis are the new great imitators, producing both, lupus and MS and stroke and rheumatoid arthritis and all these autoimmune outcomes, then and it's also causing chronic fatigue syndrome in 85%, but all these quote autoimmune diseases in the people that have the HLA molecules for hypersensitivity response or allergy response. For example, not everybody has seasonal allergies, right? That's because the people that do, have a genetic background that predisposes them to have a hypersensitivity response where their human leukocyte or HLA antigen molecules in the complex with the antigen become almost toxic in themselves, create almost a new toxin. It's hyperstimulating. And then they're released. And then some other HLA molecule picks up the complex. So it's kind of a self-driving thing. And it's because their genes dictate that their human leukocyte antigen or antigen presenting molecules either bind too tightly or we don't know the reason. But in any event, not everyone has a hypersensitivity response genetic background. People who have Lyme arthritis apparently have a hypersensitivity response to OspA. People that had the MS or the lupus outcomes from Lyme or syphilis, they're having a hypersensitivity response to the Epstein-Barr or the cytomegalovirus or the secondary opportunistic latent viral infections that are being reactivated. So, if we know for a fact that those are the outcomes, then we also know for a fact that the people without that genetic background for a hypersensitivity response are also sick. And those people have chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. The NIH said, I think it was 2012, that there are 4 million people in this country with chronic fatigue syndrome and 8 million with fibromyalgia. That's 12 million people who are disabled from the same post-sepsis syndrome that I'm describing to you, where they're tolerant to all kinds of infections, they're dealing with chronic active Epstein-Barr, they are not having an inflammatory response. There are other mechanisms by which they have chronic pain and neurological symptoms. For example, the herpes zoster and simplex virus are found in like Alzheimer's, and they're found in nerve root ganglia in fibromyalgia patients and so on. So they have chronic active infections of all kinds. They don't have nothing. So there's this whole spectrum of diseases, chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, 12 million people in this country. MS, I think there's like 200,000 people in this country who have MS. All kinds of cancer patients, particularly leukemia or whatever is reactivated by Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, stroke, blah, 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 ALS. All these outcomes, which are known to be the result of a spirochetal disease, are also caused by the same immunosuppressing toxin, OspA, or spirochetal triacyl lipopeptides, with OspC2 and D, and probably all the other ones. If they're hyperacylated, they have a lot of fatty acid groups on them, they're going to be perceived by the body as a toxin, an endotoxin, something that causes a fever and blah, 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 handled by toll-like receptor 2 and 1, and CD14, I think. So, you have to know what the antigen is. You have to know its structure in order to know its function. Medical school students are supposed to have had a year of general chemistry, a year of organic chemistry, and a year of biochemistry as they're part of their background. And then all these biology courses like bacteriology and genetics and physiology and blah, 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 blah. They're supposed to have this general bio background, so they should know the general concept behind chemistry is what is the structure of this thing so we can predict what it does. Because what something is at the molecular level is what it does, in a certain environment, heat, whether it's acid, you want to know what its structure is so you can predict how it's going to behave in whatever environment, human body in this case. So, it's absolutely critical that if the vaccine caused the same chronic illness, that is the thing everybody should be focusing on. Well, how in the hell? And the other result, which is that nobody's getting better. You know, there have been multiple long-term treatment and repeat treatment studies. And even Brian Fallon's group, $4.7 million study, he treated them for 14 weeks with intravenous ceftriaxone. Still not better. Most of them relapsed. Didn't work. That wasn't enough. Or wasn't adequate. And by what I mean adequate, it's because it's not really spirochetes that are making people sick. It's all this other stuff. It's the cytomegalovirus, the Epstein-Barr, HHV6. They're now tolerant to mycoplasma in the blood, which causes chronic fatigue. You know, so you've got a much more complex and severe scenario of infections and infectious disease pathophysiological processes going on than just spirochetes or just co-infections. And by the way, all the co-infections are also bearers of fungal antigens. Tick-borne diseases are cesspools of disease, is what Raymond Atweller, or somebody said. And that's almost a literal thing when you think about how PAM3-CIS is an analog. It's both naturally occurring and synthetic. But PAM3-CIS, or OspA, is an analog of the E. coli peptide. Has five acyl groups hanging off of it, and it was created by Braun or somebody like that, to be a functional mimic to be used in experiments of the E. coli lipid A toxin. E. coli, dysentery, diarrhea, whatever it is. Makes you pretty sick. And they wanted to inject this crap, almost literally, right into people's bloodstream. They didn't care about the outcome. Did not care. They had decided beforehand that they were going to use the tobacco science approach. Oh, we don't understand, or we don't know, and we don't know what disease you have, but it's not Lyme. It's not the bad knee with the hypersensitivity response. And so that was the plan right from the beginning. They were going to go forward with it regardless. They literally had Philip Morris as a sponsor of the ALDF.com. They literally had tobacco science backing them up for their PR campaigns. How are they going to handle this? You know, I think people remember that they were saying, oh, Lyme is a very serious disease. And Robert Schoen was talking about, there's signs of gliosis in the cerebrospinal fluid of Lyme victims, a chronic neurologic disease, which is not a knee, by the way, when the vaccine was about to be released. Here they are making this Lyme out to be as serious as it really is to sell the vaccine. But if you have it, no, you don't have. That's not a disease. It's only a bad knee. I don't know what you're talking about. We don't know disease. So, mechanistically, OspA alone injections describes the whole spectrum of disease outcomes because it is a well-known phenomenon.